Okay. Yeah. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Robert. I'm based in Austria, so I have a very strong developer background. This is why I would like to show you a few examples how we can basically analyze our code and how we can improve our solutions. And of course, thank you for the time so that I have the chance to show the topics today. I don't go too much into the details here, so I'm not going to talk about Roslyn and how to build a compiler and stuff, but I would like to show you, okay, how we can use in a very efficient way solutions and open them and see, okay, what is wrong and find the issues there and fix them immediately. So the goal is more or less to know, okay, what is important for our solutions and what can be ignored. So I already think I already introduced myself, so I can skip this one. Not important for us now. So the most important part, the topics. I would like to split my presentation in two parts. So the first part is more or less about the structure of our projects, because at the end, everybody says, okay, we don't have much code. Yeah, we don't have much plugins. We don't have much web resources. We do most of the stuff with no code components. That's totally fine. Yeah, but I still think it's very important to have a good project structure because it's always the same. Yeah, so you start a new project. Doesn't matter if it's enterprise scale or the middle size. Yeah. At the end, you will have a couple of plugins. So what the people usually do is they create a solution. It's pretty messy. They don't care. So they just create stuff and create new stuff. And after a few months, you have a lot of code and a pretty messy structure. And then it's pretty tough to fix all those things. Yeah. So this is why I would like to show a few very simple steps where we can make sure that we have the right structure, even for enterprise projects. So we don't have to invest much time. Yeah, we just have to do it right in the beginning. And then we can move on to the second part, a few common coding issues. And this is why this is where I would like to show something about code analytics. So basically how we can detect plugin loops. And in most cases, it's a very simple thing. So just a few things we have to consider there, but it saves us a lot of time. And also some performance leaks. Those are more complicated because at the end, plugin loops, where you will see it immediately. Yeah, of course, you try to execute your code, and in most cases, you will see it immediately. But regarding performance leaks, it's pretty tough because you need to know exactly what's going on. In the worst cases, you see it in production and you haven't seen it before. And this is a thing many people do, especially when you start with Dataverse projects and you don't really know how it works behind the scenes. Yeah, the people start to write some code because they think it works, and in production, you have those kind of issues. So I would like to show you how we can detect those things automatically so we don't have those kind of problems. And typos, in this case, it doesn't mean just comments. It means, of course, the data models or the schema names and so on, relationship names. This is more or less related to early bound entities. So we should generate code instead of type names. So this is another thing I would like to show you then. And stateful plugins. Yeah, and I think this is a very common mistakes. One of the common mistakes you have to know. We usually don't do consulting services. We are working with a lot of partners, and we basically just apply best practices. So we join the projects when something is pretty wrong. So we help them to detect those kind of things. And this is why we are developing software to analyze code and detect this kind of plugin issues and whatever. So yeah, I would like to give you some insights there so you understand it in a better way and don't make the same mistakes again. Okay, then let's start with the basics here. And as I said, I would like to show you the project setup, and then we can move on to code analytics. But I think it's important to understand why I recommend to do this kind of project setup, because then it's easier to analyze the code. So it doesn't make sense to start with a very complex setup and then analyze the code. It's much easier if we start with a good, solid project structure, and then it's easier to understand the analytics part. Okay, cool. Before we move on to the code, of course, I have prepared a few lines of code, a few examples, and my slides are pretty simple. So we want to focus on the most important stuff here, and this is why those slides are not so fancy. But let's take a look at the do's. Yeah, and I think most of you already know. Yeah, so we should use strongly typed classes. So we should generate code. You will see that later why it's pretty bad when we don't do that. It doesn't matter if you write the code manually or if you have to analyze it. Yeah, in both cases, it's pretty bad when you don't have generated code. Yeah, high risk of typos. The types can be different. Yeah, so for example, option set is a very common thing, but also activity part is so if you have to deal with activities like email, appointments, and so on. There are some special fields, and most of the people don't know, so they just try it again and again. So they waste a lot of time with warrant errors. So this is another good reason why we should generate code, yeah. And you should also have a base class, yeah. And by the way, all of those do's, I will show you how we can analyze them automatically, so we will get the warnings in Visual Studio. So the main goal here is, if you open a new project, so for example, if you join a new project and you have a lot of code there, you don't know it, and you usually don't know what's going on, who is the author of that, and so on. So you have to open a project and have to fix something. And if you know you have a lot of issues there, because Visual Studio will warn you automatically, then you don't have to expect that this was working. So you just fix your stuff, and then you have to invest more time to test it, because you know you have those kind of issues. So yeah, base classes, and it should be stateless. We will see a few examples later why it should be stateless. The same thing is basically for activities and so on. So if you have some instance variables or properties, you cannot be sure that the behavior is like expected, because those instances will be reused, and if you have some bad luck, yeah, the values are undefined, or at least you don't know what actually is going on. So we will see that later as well. And also one thing that people usually do it in the wrong way, you have your plugin and your business logic within the same class. That's it. Of course, it works, yeah, and don't understand me wrong. Some of the recommendations here are not 100% correct. Of course, you can challenge them, but at the end, I've seen it so many times that the people do it in the wrong ways. This is why I recommend that. But of course, you can challenge that statement. Yeah. So I'm saying you should split the logic, and let me call it control flow. So if a plugin or if a business logic should be executed or not, we would like to split that. So we have the plugin logic part where we have to deal with the message and so on. Is it great or update, whatever. And the other part is the business logic itself, where we just apply the logic and don't care about the plugin context. So this is a basic rule, and you really can't believe me that it helps a lot. And the other thing, yes, more or less the same thing again. So we should not use strings to access data. So we should not type the type names of some field or attribute or entity name. Yeah. It's much better if we have code here. So let's take a look at the example here. I've prepared a small example here. And before I go into the details here, let me quickly introduce my project here. This is a very simple one, so there's nothing special. I got a domain project here, we will see that later, and 2 class libraries. So this is a very common thing. I think everybody knows how to do that. So before we go to the other one, let's start with this one. This is a very common project, and I got one example here, and I called it very bad account plugin. The reason why I call it very bad is because I would like to show you 3 different versions of the same plugin. So let's say I have a very simple requirement here. I would like to change a value, in this case the owner, if the status was changed. Okay, so what I have to do now is I have to think about, okay, what is the context? Yeah, and let me also explain why I'm showing you this. I would like to go with a very simple example, and then we write it in 3 different ways, and then we are going to analyze that. This is why I show you a very common case here. So about the case, there's nothing special here. So basically, I change it if the status is different now. So what I usually do is, or people do, I don't do that. They create a plugin, okay, and then you have to use iPlugin, and this is the first step, which is actually wrong, yeah, because the people always copy the same stuff again and again, yeah. And I say now, don't do that. Create a base class, but this is the next example then. So for now, let's keep it like this. And the next thing here is, okay, target entity. And in many cases, the entity is of the entity type is, the type of the target is entity, but in some cases it's entity reference. Yeah, and this is one thing that people always forget. It depends, is it delete, create, update, whatever. Yeah, so there are a couple of things we have to consider when it comes to plugins. And the reason why this is important is when we analyze the code, we have to consider those things. Yeah, so for example, if we have a plugin and we would like to warn the user if you do something in the wrong way. So for example, if you convert the target into an entity reference, and the context here is, for example, retrieve, it's not going to work. Yeah. If you are in the custom API, whatever. So there are some cases where it's not working. So first thing to understand is if you analyze the code, you need to understand the context. So let's take a look at the available information here. We have plugin name. Okay, that's good. So what we can do now is we can retrieve the plugin steps. So this is a normal entity, so we can get the data and then we can compare the types. Yeah, and this is a little bit challenging because in most cases the type is the same. Yeah, so if you're using plugin registration tool to register your assembly, the name is the same. Yeah, but you cannot be sure 100%. So let's assume the name is the same. Yeah. So what I can do is I can retrieve the plugin steps and I can compare it to my name. So we have to use the full namespace and the type name, of course. And then we know, okay, this code will be executed in the context of a create operation. Okay, create is pretty cool because in the create operation, we know in our targets, it's always an entity and we will always have all attributes. Well, that's not correct. It depends if you create an entity, if you actually execute a create request, only the included attributes will be there. So if you try to access the owner, it's fine because we will always have an owner ID. But if you try to access the state code, you cannot be sure 100%. So in our create operation, it's okay. But for update, it's more difficult because in update, we always have, we only have the changed attributes. So next step is here, if we would like to execute some business logic, depends on the values, we have to compare them. So what people sometimes do is, let's say I got my target here and I say state code, if the state code is there. So let's say, okay, if target contains. Okay, and now I can do some logic. Okay, yes, that works for the create operation, but not for update. Because for update, of course, I have to compare the pre-image and the actual target. Yeah, and yes, this is a little bit more complicated because you have to make sure that the attribute is within the target collection. So you have to check that. Let's see. So this is the first step here. And then I need my pre-image. Yeah. So what I can do is I can use the context. Oh, okay. Sorry, I already get it here. So there we go. Okay. So when I do that, I know, okay, let's assume this is a update operation. And I have it in my targets here. Okay, cool. And then I have to compare it if it's also available in the image. So let's assume we are using plugin registration tool to register the image, then we can select the different attributes. But usually we have to check that. So one thing we have to make sure is that we are using the right key here. So in this case, it's pre-image. This is pretty easy to analyze because it's always the same context here. So we have the pre-image there. Then we have to make sure that the attribute is there. So we have to open plugin registration tool and take a look at the images and the attributes, and then we know, okay, it's there. So what I can do now is I have to compare the state code of the target with state code of my image. So this looks something like this. This is the state code.
Hi, Robert. This is really great. So some of the attendees are asking if you could zoom in a little bit, if that's possible, because they can't see much of what you're writing there. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure, no problem, please. Sorry for that. Is this better now?
Fantastic. That's a lot better. Thank you so much, Robert.
Okay, thanks for letting me know. Yeah. Okay, so yes, so what I have to do now is, and yes, you can see I got my account here and the other stuff. So I have to compare that. So this is what the people usually do with, and this is pretty dangerous, yeah, because you're comparing the actual values without know if the type is the same. So we know both cases are option sets, yeah, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think there's an implicit typecast there, but it would be much better if you compare it. So let's say something like this. Okay, looks better now. And now we have another problem. Okay, both values can be null. So it's not getting better, yeah. The reason why I'm telling you this is, please don't do it like this. Yeah, this is really, really bad. Yeah, because at the end you have a very bad code. Yeah, you have a lot of unnecessary code. You have a lot of unnecessary typecasts and so on. So don't do it like this. I will show you later how we can generate code. There are a couple of tools for that. But at the end, it's easier to understand and you have less bugs. Yeah, so this is why we should not do it like this. But for our example here, I think it's okay. So at the end, I know now that state code has changed. Okay. Okay, cool. So now I can execute my logic. Okay. Oh, I already got it here. So. Okay. But to be honest, I'm really not happy with that. Yeah. So when I see something like this, it's really difficult to understand the whole thing. I mean, in this case, it's easy, but the people sometimes do a lot of stuff here. And then they do something like, I don't know, here, and then maybe some tracing service and some other stuff. Yeah. And this is really, really bad again, because yes, you can see it now. It's easy to understand that because it's just one method. Yeah. But if you have a couple of other methods here, it's getting complicated. So this is why I say do not do it like this. So only use the necessary parameters. So if you have a tracing service on your context and a couple of other stuff, it's too complicated. I recommend to create a logic class. So instead of having the logic within the same plugin class, we can go ahead and say, okay, so now I have my logic here, and oops, this was the wrong one. And I want my service and my tracing service, yes. So give me a second to fix that. I will explain the details in a second. Let me just write that down here. So okay, so what I have now is I have a specific class, and as you can see, this class, it's stateful, and stateful means I can have instance variables and instance properties and so on, and also have a constructor function. And as you can see, my parameters here, they're very generic. The organization service and the tracing service, so they're not related to any specific business logic. And this is a very cool approach because now I have the possibility to add business logic. So for example, and the reason why I do this here is I can't focus on my business logic. So I don't care about any parameters. I don't care about the context. Is it create, delete, whatever. I just want to execute my business logic. And if you're working in an enterprise environment, things are getting very complicated sometimes. And if you mix your plugin related logic, like is it create, update, and how to retrieve the images and stuff, if you mix that with your business logic, it's getting very complicated. Nobody knows exactly what's going on. And it's always very difficult to unit test. And then the people start to write unit tests and invest a lot of time to basically fake all the plugin context related stuff. Yeah. Why making things so complicated? Yeah. Use a specific logic class. It's easier. Yeah. And one more thing regarding the arguments, I saw that so many times that people have a list of arguments and all of them are useless. Just the last one is necessary for the actual logic. So of course, this is very basic knowledge about programming. I can use my variables here. So of course I got my service. I don't need it here. Yeah, I don't need it in the parameters. So place with your systems, your dynamic system, like any other software system, yeah. Make it reusable, yeah, create components, isolate those components, yeah. Don't mix everything together, yeah. I mean, this is a very basic principle of software development, and it makes your life so much easier, you know. Okay, so I got my logic here, and as you can see, this is better now, so I can basically move my logic to another class, have my service and my tracing stuff here, and then I, of course, can execute that. And the only thing what I need here is my target. So what I usually do is within the logic class, I change the values, I retrieve some stuff, maybe I create some things, but I usually don't do updates on the target. The reason for that is because, of course, I would like to reuse my logic for create operations and for updates. And as I already said, the attributes and so on are different. Yeah, so this is why I split it. So I do my stuff there, and when I'm done, I can say service update target. And it says that this is bad. So let's see why this is bad. Okay, we got too much stuff. We will take a look at this later. I think it's easier to see that here. Yeah, okay. And it says the target entity should not be updated by the organization service. This is exactly what I was talking about before. Why not do something like this? In most cases, this is bad. Because if I trigger an update now, there's a high chance that I will get an infinity loop. So if I update it here, there are two different cases, actually 3 different cases. The first case is I'm in the pre-operation. It doesn't matter pre-create or pre-update, yeah. So that means I already have a transaction context, and that means after the operation, there's the main operation which will do the actual update, yeah. So if I execute an update now, in most cases, I will get an infinity loop because the update on the target will trigger another update and so on. So at the end, you have infinity loop. And this is why I should not do that. So the first case is pre-operation, yeah. Well, pre-validation is the same thing here. Second case is, okay, you have post-operation, yeah. Yes, the update is necessary if I'm in post-operation state, but at the end, it's much better if you move the logic to a pre-stage. So you don't have to trigger the update, yeah, because the update will be there anyway, so move the logic. And this is why in both cases, doesn't matter pre or post, yeah, the update on the target is always bad. So we should not do that. So, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention the third case. There are some exceptions if you're in an async operation, yeah, and then it's different. But yes, in most cases, you have pre and post, and it's always better to move it to pre. And if you have some logic with dependencies to some created entities, you can split the logic. So this is why I say, okay, use logic classes. So you can basically move around your logic without any problems. So you have the first group where you do your plugin stuff, the routing and so on, and then you execute the logic. So this is much better now. Okay, so this was basically our first error message here. We should not do that, so we can remove it. Yeah. Okay, cool. And we will come back to this example later. In the beginning, I was talking about the project structure and why it is bad to do something like this. Okay, so as I said, okay, I would like to make sure that the state code has changed. And this is what I have to do. I have to create my pre-image and so on, and then I'm using some strings to access the relevant data, and this is bad. And also this one, so yeah, I don't like to copy code. I mean, it's also a very common best practice thing that we should not copy the code again. So let's move on to a bad account plugin. Yeah. So in the beginning, I started with a very bad thing, and now we have another example, and this is a little bit better. Let's see. So we got plugin again, and now we got a plugin base. So now my execute method looks a little bit different, and yeah, I know this is nothing new. So I can quickly introduce that example, and then we can move on to the third version. So in this case, this is a simple plugin base here. highly recommended. It's much better than anything else. Yeah, it's much better than retrieving all the stuff from the service provider and so on. So what I just do is, okay, basically create some context where I can keep the data. So for example, the target and so on of my service, so I don't have to retrieve that again and again. So there are a couple of side effects here. When I have my logic class, I can easier access the parameters like the target and so on. Yeah, but be careful. In this case, I think I wrote it during my last webinar. So this is not a 100% wave reduction example, because this will fail in a couple of scenarios, like if the target is not an entity, if it's an entity reference and so on. But I think you can get the idea here. So why not do the same thing here? Yeah, I got my context, and okay, then can have access to my image and so on. That's much better. But one thing I have to mention as well, I got entities here. This is a very important part. Without the entities, it's not possible to write something like this. So of course, now I got access to the name and so on. So of course, I also got some kind of example description. And of course, we know that's the same thing. Yeah. So yes, I got IntelliSense and it helps a lot, but it's still better if you're using your entities as early bound entities. That's always better. Yeah, also for option sets and so on. I mean, if you would like to access the type, yeah, I think most of them know you don't know all of those numbers. Just a second, I have to drink the water. So yes, that's always better here. Okay, so of course now I can do the same. So I got my entity here, and I need to add some logic for the plugin for the images, but it's more or less the same. So at the end, I have a better code, but I still have to check if, for example, context message name. So I will end with something like this. Yeah, and then I have the same shape again. So I don't want to do this. Yeah, much better approach, and this is the third example here. Is this one? We can ignore it for now. This is an example for later. And yes, I'm using our internal SDK now, but I think you can write your own. I think we published it a few weeks ago, but yeah, invest some time so you can write it on your own if you want. What I do here now is I have the same thing, but I get some attributes. So I basically delegate the calls through the routing engine with some reflection. That's pretty easy. So at the end, define my step via an attribute. So I got my entity name here, I got my message, preparation, and some settings about async and so on. So now it looks different. Still got my service provider, and I can create my context. And now it's pretty cool because I don't have to think about the routing stuff and so on, because everything is already predefined. So in this case, in my operation, it doesn't matter how I name it. So I just can call it, okay, account, reopen, whatever. And now I have my settings here, so I can work with my entities. I got my target here, I got my business entities, merge target, and so on. And merge target is a special one. If you remember, we had to use some codes to basically check if attribute is there, if it has changed, and so on. Let's do the same with some helper methods. And don't understand me wrong, I'm not telling you that this is something very special. Yeah, I'm just telling you that you should do it or invest some time to create some plugin base. So let's say account and my context. And now we got state code. Okay. So isn't that cool? This is much better. Yeah. And it's less code, yeah, and we don't have to deal with the images and so on, because behind the scenes, this will retrieve the image and the pre-image and will compare it to the target and will handle all of those typecast stuff and null pointers and whatever. So at the end, I can now execute my logic without any additional stuff. Yeah, and this is think really cool. Yeah. So invest some time to create your plugin base for routing and also for some helper methods, so you don't have to deal with that weird logic with comparing the values and so on. So this is much cooler, yeah, and also it's easier to analyze. Yeah. Okay, then let me go back to my slides here. We'll go back to the code in a few minutes. I just would like to give you some background here. So we saw that example here, and now we have another one about code generation. Already said that, and you should scope your domain, and that basically means, of course, in Dynamics or in Dataverse, you have so many entities. There's so much out-of-the-box stuff here. So if you try to generate your code for the whole project, it takes too much time here, and it's useless and complicated, and there's always a risk of name conflicts and so on. So scope your domain, just use the entities you need. Then it's easy to implement the business logic, because at the end you would like to focus on business logic and not the other stuff. Yeah, and we got the same thing here. So you should use enums instead of numbers for the option sets and so on. And this is a very important point, what we sometimes see in projects. So we open the solution, we run our code analytics stuff, and then we see a lot of wrong numbers. Yeah, the numbers are not matched with the actual schema. And special thing is also state code and status code. Sometimes there's a mismatch, yeah, and it's very hard to identify that. So this is a thing we see a lot. Yeah, so really use generated code so you don't have those issues. So let's take a look at the example here. I've prepared something. Yes. And by the way, this is demo code, so it's just some random stuff here. So don't think about the actual logic, and this is only to show you some things here. Let's say this one here. So imagine you're in a situation where you have to fix something in a project, and you have never worked before with this project. So you just open it, you got a lot of stuff here, and now you have to fix something because there is some kind of keynote found exception or whatever. So let's say I'm here, and I think this is complicated, yeah, because what I usually do is, as a human being, of course, I read the instance here, or actually I read the line, then I'm looking for a definition. I can see it here, and then I have to go through the whole expression here. And yes, it's getting weird. So at the end, I have to take a look at the query, and then I go back. So I basically have to trace down the whole code execution path. And at the end, I will see something like this. And yeah, and now it's more complicated. So at the end, I am not happy with that. So in this case, it could be account leads and contacts. And as I said, this whole thing doesn't make sense. This is just to show you how it can be, but I think you can imagine that there are a couple of cases where the people do something like this. So at the end, I know, okay, contact account leads, yeah, and some linked entities. So what I do now is, okay, I have to go back to Dataverse, take a look at the names and so on, and then I know, okay, I don't know what it is, let's say, yeah, address, wrong name. Okay, now I can fix that. So I have fixed the key and it's fine now, yeah. So yes, this is a bad example, but people sometimes do that. So what I'm telling you now is, okay, split the logic, make sure that the entities, when you retrieve something, is very close to the code where you need it. That's one thing, but there must better approaches if you're using early bound entities. So at the end, I don't care about the query. If I have to debug the code, yes, then I have to take a look at that. But if it's an account instead of the generic entity, I don't have to do the whole things. I don't have to trace it down, and I don't have to take a look at an schema. So because I have it there. So let's say this is an account. I think it was this one, yes, okay. So yeah, that's much better, yeah. So there are so many reasons why you should generate code, yeah. So we don't have to do all of that stuff, and it's getting complicated. Even with IntelliSense, it's a tough job, so don't do that. I think there's no reason why we should use late bound entities there. So, okay, cool. Then let me go back to my slides here. Then the next one. One thing about the do's, yes, use the SDK. Yeah. So if you are working with C#, yeah, you can always use the SDK. I saw some weird implementations with HTTP client and so on. So it's not cool at all. So use the SDK. That's much better. Codification. So I think it sounds stupid, but the people do it all the time. They're writing plugins and copy those lines. It's always the same, the organization service and how to retrieve the tracing service and so on. Don't do that. Use a plugin base. That's always much better. Yeah. And I think the other stuff, prefer code for complex logic. Yes, I think this is one general statement. There are a lot of no-code components or low-code components. Yeah, for complex logic, it's always better to use code. Yeah, because you can do unit tests. Yeah, so you can make sure that they have some kind of quality insurance and a couple of other things. Yeah, it's easier to maintain and so on. So I'm not saying that you should not use no-code components. Yeah, I'm just saying if the logic is complex, go for the code way. Yeah. In most cases, this is more efficient. Yeah, and take it seriously. I mean, it's like any other software project. Yeah. Use source control, use a proper solution setup, like I said, with plugin bases and so on. You can save so much time down the road, because if you, at the end of the project you have a pretty messy code base, it's a tough job to repair that thing. So don't do that. It's the same thing for hard-coded values and so on in editors. This is about web resources. Yeah, sometimes people just upload the code directly to the system. Now, implement a proper CI/CD pipeline, and then everything is easier. You have versioning. You can be sure that you have the right stuff in production, so you don't have to deal with this kind of issues. And sometimes we have to analyze things like that, and then we see, okay, the version is different, the deployment was not working, and so on. So this is a very common root cause for unexpected behavior. So just set up in the correct way. Yeah, a few things about the solution structure. What I usually do is I have one assembly for each entity. So something like this, because I can upload it directly to my system. So I can deploy it. Okay, it's not built even now, so I cannot deploy it. But if I have multiple assemblies for each entity, so each entity have one assembly, there's no dependency between me and my colleagues. So if somebody else is working on another entity, we don't have any conflicts there. Yeah? So don't use just one assembly. And this is one simple step. So what the people usually do in the wrong way. They set up the project, they don't care about the plugins, because they're just 3 plugins, so we don't care. No, at the end, you will have a couple more plugins, at least in enterprise project. So just do it in the right way. And yeah, messy prefixes, that means the publisher prefix. Some people don't know that there are a couple of side effects. If you have multiple solutions with different publishers, yeah, it's pretty bad, because it's one side, it's hard to identify, okay, which values are used, yeah. And the other thing is regarding solution layers. So if you have multiple layers and you have different definitions of entities and different solutions, it's difficult to remove stuff. Yeah, so just define one prefix and use it for a solution, and then that's fine. Yeah, in most cases there are very few exceptions, but in most cases one publisher is enough. Yeah. Okay, and yeah, this is basically the last thing for the first part here. We got do's and don'ts regarding performance issues. And well, when you write code, yeah, please understand the iQuery interface is a very important one. Yeah, and it's different than any array or list or whatever. Yeah, I will show you that as well. It's related to the database and so on. So if you can retrieve a single entity via the ID, in most cases that's fine. But if you have another value, create keys. Yeah. So you don't have to retrieve multiple. If you have keys, it will create a database index, and then you can retrieve it based on the index. So you can use a retrieve single instead of retrieve multiple. And this is one thing we also check when you're using retrieve multiple, and then you have something like single or first or default. We also warn you about that. So it makes sense to check that. And yes, we will see that later on. And Now a few things before we run out of time here about a few common use cases. And this is actually my favorite plugin loops. We already talked about that. And here we got the summary again, what we have to consider if you think about plugin loops. So of course the stage, so if it's pre or post, and as I said, target entity changes should be in the pre-stage always. I think there are no real exceptions for that. Custom logic, and that means, of course, with ifs, you can change it. So what the people sometimes do, they have something like this. If you take a look at the example here, and then they say, if it's a create operation, we do that. If it's update, we do the other thing. Yeah. And if the plugin count or the deep is, I don't know, higher than 3, we just return. Yes, that works. So when we think about plugin logic, we have to think about the custom logic as well. But that's bad. So just fix it in the right way, move it to the pre-stage, and then everything is fine. And yes, of course, message and trigger change and so on. So there are a couple of things we have to consider when it comes to plugin loops. But I think we already talked about that. Performance links, and this is what I meant when I was talking about the iQueryable interface. Because you might know it, account set in this case is generated context, and it is a class inherited from the queryable interface. And that means, of course, we can do something like toList. And this is a very bad thing, yeah, because at the end you will actually try to retrieve all accounts with all attributes. And in most cases, you will run into a timeout. So this is why we warn you about this one as well. So if you see something like generated context and then a set and toList, in almost every case, that's bad, yeah. So don't do that at all. It's the same if you call toList query or whatever. At the end, if you convert the query interface into some type, it will retrieve all things, yeah. So let me show you that as well. We got the account plugin here. So let's say I got a So I create a new context. And of course, I need my organization service. Oops. And that's it here. And by the way, this is pretty cool. So I don't have to retrieve my organization somewhere. I got it. This is cool. So now I can say account set to array. And yes, now I can work with that. So people sometimes start to write something like this, where and so on. No, don't do that. This is pretty bad, because if you do it like this, it will retrieve the data first and then you filter it locally. So, I mean, it will never be executed because you will want a timeout here in most cases. So let's take a look at that. And this is my account set here. So this is just a normal domain project. I have some generated entities here. And I got my queryable interface. And at the end, there's a query provider which will translate my code into fetch XML or query expression, whatever, and it will get the data from Dynamics and it will convert it back to my classes here. So I will have something like this. And yes, and as I said, this is bad. We should not do that. So we should filter it. So it's much better if we do it something like in context. And then I can filter something. So I can say, okay, whatever. Okay, so this is much better because there should be at least one condition. Yeah. Okay. So before we run out of time, we got a few minutes left. So as I said, when we have to analyze statements like this, we have to consider statement itself, of course. So if it's toList or whatever, if there are any filters and the number of columns. Yeah. So if you have a single retrieve, usually we don't care. So you can retrieve all columns, but if you're retrieving multiple entities, so multiple records, you should define the column set with only the necessary columns. That's much faster. And yeah, this one, as I said, this is only important if you don't use early bound entities, but sometimes we have to use the type name. So let me show an example here. And in my plugin base, in this case, it's the state code here. There's no real other chance to handle that situation. I mean, you can generate something. I think I got my, that's it. I can do something like this. So I can get the name of the state code, but this is more complicated than necessary. So at the end, I can use the strings. But the problem is regarding types that the people sometimes don't understand. That is, if I have something like this. And let's say email, yes. And of course, email is an activity, so this is a special thing. And I want to try to add something like this now. Let's say sender. It's called from, yeah. So yes. No, it's this one. Okay. And the from is a special thing. It's a list, so most people don't know how it works behind the scenes, but it's a activity party list. So when I try to set that value directly, I will get some problems. So let's do it with early bound entities. That's much better. So if I try something like this. It doesn't matter. Of course, this example can ignore the ID, but this will fail. So I have problems here to know the right type. Yeah, that's another good reason why we should not use late bound entities there. Of course, we got a warning as well for this one. So yeah, I think you can understand why it's bad here. But let's try it in a different way. Let's say first. Do the same here. And now I know this is an entity collection. Yeah. So at the end, it's difficult to understand why this is not working. Yeah. So you have to create a collection of, then you have to create activity parties and so on. So this is easier if you have something like this. Okay. Then the last two examples. This example was basically the same. So it doesn't matter if you have any condition expressions and so on, because this will basically will be sent to the system and then will be checked if it's aligned with the schema and so on. So it will fail. Yeah, and this is where we have those warnings here. Yeah, same thing for the other things here. So like the attribute doesn't exist and so on. Let's move on to the next one. Detect stateful plugins. Yeah, as I said, plugins should be stateless. You should not use any local variables or properties because the instances will be reused. And that means the object will be created just once or multiple times, but in some cases just once, and it will be reused. That means the execute method will be called on the same object multiple times. And if you have an instance variable here, you don't know the value, so you cannot identify the behavior. It will be something totally random. Yeah. So let's see how it works. I got my plugin here, and here is not build able. Okay, let's use a different one. I think this is better. And I don't get a warning. Okay, I'm not sure why it should be. It should run me. Okay, I don't get the warning now. Okay, maybe we have too much stuff there. Let's try to fix that here. Okay, the whole analytics part is a background process. So sometimes it takes some time, but it should run me here. I don't know why it's not working right now. Okay, but this should be the warning here. Yeah, okay, good. That's one thing, and the other one was already there. And yes, we should not use the plugin interface directly, but I think I already explained that. Let's try if it's working here. Yeah, okay, here's working. Okay, maybe there's something wrong with the inheritance checks, yeah, but of course, it doesn't matter if you have your instance variable or instance property here, or if you have it in an inherited class. In both cases, you should not have it. As I said, you should move the whole logic to a separated class, and then you can have instance variables and basically scope your whole logic within the class, so you don't have to deal with the state codes and the property changes and so on. Okay, cool. I had to skip a few things, but I hope that you learned something and understand the analytics part a little bit better now and why we sometimes have issues in our code. Let me go back to my slides and I will now take a look at the questions here. Let me see. Okay. Okay, just give me a second to read the first few questions here. Okay. Okay, let me start from the back. Yeah, which early bound generated tool would you recommend? Thanks. Yeah, well, actually, we are using our internal tool. This is can show you that. This is a Visual Studio extension. It's called KCA. You can download it from the marketplace. It's very straightforward. So you just define your domain stuff here. In most cases, it's predefined. Then I can enter my entities here. And this will basically generate my code, which will also generate some stuff for custom APIs and so on. So at the end, the idea was to have a very simple, straightforward tool to generate the code. So I don't have to write any scripts and I don't have to configure something, just install it. And then there's a configuration dialog. Show that as well. So I can configure it here. And when I got my connection, I can basically generate my code here. I can do the same thing for TypeScript and so on. So feel free to test that. Okay. There are a couple of things here. Maybe I will try to reply to all of them later. But okay. Okay, actually, I'm looking for actual questions. There is an ongoing discussion there. Okay.
Here we go. So there's a question by Coquelin. Robert, which early bound generator tool would you recommend?
Yes, so basically this is what I think you can still see my screen now. As I said, I'm using this. I think I can use it right here. I'm using this one. It's called Code Analytics. This is our own solution. So this is basically, as I said, a Visual Studio extension. So it's for free, by the way. There's a premium version as well, but the code generation part is for free. So you can use this also in commercial projects. Yeah. So what we do here is you can see in the preview, we generate, of course, the entities itself, but also some requests and responses for custom APIs and some other things. Yeah. So as I said, just feel free to try it out. It's very simple to use. So at the end, you can do the setup in 2 minutes. So you don't have to write any code. You don't have to configure something. Yeah, it's really straightforward. Yeah, the advanced things. Yeah, I think this is not necessary now. So the most important part is this one, the namespace and the location, and that's more or less it. Yeah. Do we have any other questions? There's so much text there, so it's hard for me to identify the actual questions here. Yeah.
there's lots of great conversation going on. I think that's really healthy, really good. So well done, guys. Use this as a platform for exchanging ideas. That's exactly what we're here for. Okay. Someone shared another link. Kwang shared a link to that tool, and some great conversation around IL merge and dependency management approaches in code, which your presentation was on today, and people are sharing different techniques. IntelliSense. Here we go. Kenneth has asked, the IntelliSense suggestions extension where Dataverse is presented in strings, what's that called?
Yes, that's the same one. So it's also code analytics. I think I can show you that here. It's a pretty new one. Some of the features are still in preview, but it's this one. So if you search for KCA, you will find it. And what it does is it does some code analytics things, but also IntelliSense and so on. So when you do the setup, you install it, and then you just go to configure, right? It will automatically prompt you and load your organizations here. So let me just log on. And then I connect to the organization, and let's test it first. Okay. And for the first setup, it will basically generate some cache. So we need that to be able to generate the code, but also to provide IntelliSense and so on. So it's the same extension. I think there's, Wang, my colleague Wang sent a link so they, to have the information there. But basically, it will cache the metadata, and then you have the IntelliSense for entities, attributes, relationships, and so on. So a couple of things there. That's the same.
Thank you, Robert. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Oh, finally, one final question. Cocculent is asking, how much is the premium version, and how can we get the paid version?
There are a couple of ways to do that, but I think the most efficient way is if you just reach out via LinkedIn. So one of the salespeople will tell you the details, because I don't know all the details regarding the licensing thing. I'm only the technical guy. So please reach out to them on LinkedIn.
Thank you, Robert. Well, Robert, it was a great pleasure. Thank you for sharing your insights and best practices. It definitely is something that's highly required among developers. So thank you for sharing your insight today, joining us all the way from Austria. And we hope to see you in the near future in person next time, hopefully.
Oh, yeah.
And please feel free. And please feel free to share your contact details and blog or wherever in the chat, just so that the attendees and the community can keep in touch with you.
Yeah, I will do that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Robert. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic, guys.